Hey guys, it's Nicole and it's Zoe. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be repotting this Phalaenopsis orchid. I actually just repotted it this morning and I'm going to walk you through how I got it out of my semi-hydro setup and into this organic setup. And I'm going to discuss why I'm repotting some of my orchids right at the start of winter, when it's safe to do so. And I'm going to talk more about why I'm transitioning a lot of my collection out of semi-hydro. So I have a lot of orchids like these here that I'll be transitioning over from semi-hydro into organic. We'll get into that. And I'm going to share some of the reasons why, also why I'm transitioning it. So this one has a new leaf coming in. It had new root tips, and it was done blooming for the year. So I cut off the spikes and it was a good time to repot. Now I grow indoors. Everything grows mostly in this room, which has temperatures in the winter of between about maybe 65 is the lowest temperature it gets at night to about 80-85 degrees during the day. So it's quite warm here. So it's okay for me to repot as long as I have new root tips. And just in general for my collection, I'll be repotting a lot of my Cattleya orchids and a lot of my other phals, provided they have new root tips. If they have that, then they can acclimate really well. Otherwise, it's ideal to repot in the spring. That's when things are growing much faster, but provided you have growing root tips, you'll be able to get new growths that could kind of adapt to that new system that you put it in right away, then you're generally good. So let's jump right into the video. Alrighty guys, so we have the orchid, we have some sphagnum moss. I have this pot here. It's a little shallow. I think it could work. And we have our sterilized cutting tools and our Phalaenopsis. So this one is the Phalaenopsis equestris cerulea, and it's been in this pot for 3 years. It's pretty much overdue. It bloomed for the year, so I'm cutting off the flower spikes. I noticed that it has a new leaf coming in. I did see a root tip coming in on the top, so I decided it's time to repot it. But yeah, this is definitely overdue. I removed that bottom leaf, which was dried out, and I got it out of the Leca. I realized quickly that this orchid was circling the top of the pot, and it was getting kind of crowded in there, and it didn't really get to the bottom. But we have some pretty healthy roots here. We do have some growing root tips. We have a lot of algae around it, which is quite normal for semi-hydro. We have another new root tip coming in right there. But we're going to clean this up. I'm noticing a lot of hollow dead roots and some roots that are in good shape, and then some roots that are kind of in between. So we have some that are a little dry, some that are perfect, and some that are completely dead. So I'm going to free this up, and then we'll get to trimming the roots. So it's usually ideal to repot in the spring, and that's because the temperatures are starting to warm up and the orchids are starting to push a lot of new growths at that time. But given that I grow indoors, the temperatures are warmer, and I do have some orchids that grow through the whole year, so it is perfectly acceptable to repot an orchid if you start seeing new root tips coming in. Now this orchid, it has some new root tips coming in. I wouldn't say it's the best, but I think it'll adapt just fine to sphagnum moss. It's quite overdue. I didn't want to leave it in this pot. There was a lot of dry roots up top that weren't really getting hydrated, but as you could see, we do have some decent roots. We're going to clean this up, trim anything dead off, but in general, if you are an indoor grower and you can keep your temperatures on the warmer side, and I'm talking above, say like 65 degrees, 70 degrees every night, it's usually okay to repot provided you have new root tips. Now, sometimes you'll get a new growth, and this is the case for oncidiums and Cattleyas, but the roots won't push out later. You want to wait until you start seeing those root tips come in. So that's an important tip if you're repotting. If your temperatures are too cool, I would wait for the spring, just because it is a little rougher on the orchid. I would avoid fertilizing it for a little while, just letting it acclimate to the new setup. And the orchid should do just fine. The biggest thing is just making sure that it stays pretty warm. It's not getting cold. It's not in a very cold, drafty area. And it should generally be okay. And I'll be getting through my collection through the holiday week. So I have a lot that I'm behind on. So you guys will see it. But what I'm doing right now is I'm feeling any root tips that are very hollow, papery, have no substance to them, and I'm trimming them off. We have quite a lot to trim here since this orchid was in that pot for a long time. It's not the best root system, it's not the worst root system, but I should have done this over a year ago, so I'm going to fast forward so you guys could see me clean this up. But we're just getting rid of anything that's dead and iffy. Now there are some dry roots, and those are kind of in the middle. They'll probably die off at some point, but I've decided to just leave them on there. They're not quite completely desiccated, but they look like they're on their way out. I just left them. Just given that this orchid is a tiny bit stressed, I could tell by the leaves they're a little bit dry, so I'm going to leave as much as I can, and I think it'll thrive in sphagnum moss in the new setup. So we are almost done cleaning this up, and I'm going to give it a rinse. So I was looking at the roots, and I have this shallow pot, and I measured it out, and it's not going to fit. So I got this bigger ceramic pot. I actually got this pot at a plant swap, which was really nice, and I'll never forget that I I went to the plant swap with a bunch of divisions, and instead of taking home any plants, I took home a bunch of really nice pots, so I was really proud of myself. And I find that the pots are generally more expensive many times than a lot of the plants or clippings or anything like that. So I left with a lot of really nice ceramic and orchid pots, which was amazing. So I'm still using them up. So I'm just going through this orchid just one last time looking at the roots. You'll see that it's not the best root system. I mean, we do have some growing root tips, not a lot, but it's not the best. This is my fault for not repotting sooner. It was in that other pot for 3 years, and this orchid ended up circling the top of the pot. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take our sphagnum moss, and we're going to make sure that it's very fluffy. And now we have a very, very long set of roots, and we're going to make sure that those are sticking to the outside because it's just not pliable. And if I try to get it to the inside of the pot, it's just going to break. So I'm going to tuck in anything that fits inside of that pot, and anything that doesn't fit on the inside of the pot is going to stay out. So even soaking that root for a long time, there's no way it's going to go in the pot without breaking, so it'll just stay outside. And you'll see some of those roots that are a little on the drier side, I left on there. They're not quite dead. They're probably going to be on their way out, but I'm going to leave it just to give this orchid a nice chance. So like I said, it had a couple of new root tips. I think it'll be okay. Ideally, you want more new growing root tips. But this orchid does not have the best root system, I'd say. But just given it's pushing that leaf, it's pushing out some new roots, it should be okay. And from transitioning from a semi-hydro setup to a more moisture retentive sphagnum moss setup, usually the setups go pretty well. They do tend to enjoy it. And it is a somewhat similar setup in that it is a moist setup. So you're not taking it into a drastically different environment. The only difference is this will have a chance to dry out a little more. So that's the biggest key difference with this setup. So I'm taking my sphagnum moss and I'm making sure that I'm fluffing it in. I don't want to press anything down too hard. I don't want it to be very packed in there because I don't want it to get, when I water, I don't want it to be super, super soggy. It will have lots of moisture, but I also want there to be a lot of air between the roots. And with that said, I also don't want extremely huge air pockets either because it's good for the roots to have contact with the moss. So a good balance is making sure that it's not packed in extremely tight in there. I also find that when the moss is packed very tight, when it dries out, it's very hard to get saturated with moisture. Whereas when it's fluffy, it's easier for the pot to get adequate moisture. You could kind of feel this when you get a Phalaenopsis orchid that is in one of those little sleeves. Those are packed very tightly, so when it dries out, sometimes you're not able to get so much moisture in it. So you have to soak it in order to get it, and then it'll get moisture. But when it's fluffy, it's not like that. So I'm just filling this final air gap with a little bit more moss, and anytime I press down, I make sure it's nice and fluffed. And I'm really happy with how this is looking. This is an orchid that I really enjoy. It blooms for me for quite a long time, and it gives me a lot of flowers usually. I hope the bloom count will continue to improve on it. Now that it's in a setup that I think it will be better, and I will not wait so long to repot next time. But I think this is going to be a happy orchid. I do see that it's a little stressed, just given that the leaves are a little bit dried out, but I hope that this helps it, and the new roots should push in and hopefully be happy here. I do need a new tag. This is a tiny little tag that I got from Hauserman Orchids, but otherwise this orchid is all set, and I ended up topping it off with a little bark to avoid that algae on the top, and it just looks a little better. So we're all set here. I'm happy with how this turned out. And let me know down below if any of you guys are doing any winter repots. I know it takes forever. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more orchid content. I will see you in the next video. Bye everyone.